I believe that if you want to see change in the world, you have to be part of that change. And I didn't understand. I was hurting. I was really hurting in my early 20s. Still didn't understand why. Do you know, even just the concept of trying to understand why your parents don't have that unconditional love for you before you then go into wider people who have harmed and abused you is really hard to process. And for my own benefit, I recognised that I had to be able to process it, I had to be able to understand it, and I had to be able to move past it. And so that was where my learning came. And then my deep desire right from back then was to help people, young people in the same position as me, avoid being harmed in the same way. And that was what led my early career, very much all of my learnings and then my experience, and then going to the prison to do to work with the people I worked with was very much about gaining that knowledge to be able to prevent harm, abuse and neglect happening to other young people who were in the same situation as me. So I then spent 20 years doing that, but I did it. I guess my career history goes from operational right up to strategic. So I jumped around because what I did was I worked very operationally, delivering therapy for a number of years. I then fell pregnant with my eldest daughter, who's now 15, and I couldn't deliver therapy to people convicted of sexual offences. It changed my mindset at that point, and I had to step away from it. I went through a period of burnout and breakdown. My marriage broke up. I was married at the time. I'm married again, but to a wonderful man now. My marriage broke up, and I found myself really struggling again, and I had to survive in a different way for different reasons. But I carried on working with people who have complex needs. So I then moved into managing homeless services for the local authority. So you'll see the two themes here about the abuse and the homelessness. And for 7 years, I managed homeless hostels and worked with people with complex needs, families and young people who were experiencing homelessness. But I was banging my head on a brick wall because there was constrictions within statutory services that me, with my background, I just wouldn't accept. So if there was poor practice, I would be the first to say. I was always there as an advocate for the service user. And so right from my days working in the young offenders unit, you know, there was one incident where there was a young lad who had been addicted to heroin since the age of 2. His parents had purposely injected him so that he, in his tiny little small state, could climb through the windows and do the stealing. Yeah.
What the fuck is wrong with people? Ugh.
This was the world I was living in, Glenn. Do you know, the reason I give you that example is because he came to the secure unit broken, really broken, to the extent that he did not know how to use a knife and fork. He came to the secure unit when he was 14, that's what I should say. He was 14, but he looked 8. Because he'd used so much heroin, his body hadn't gone through the hormonal process. He couldn't eat, he couldn't use a knife and fork, and he could barely have a conversation with you. And I became his key worker and spent 8 to 12 hours a day with him. If you think I was broken and fearful of adults and such like, I had nothing on the pain and trauma that he experienced. But skip forward 6 months. His grandma died whilst he was locked up, and she was the only positive influence in his life. And we put in a request for him to go to the funeral. He needed to be able to process that, and it was denied. So I took a night shift and took him anyway, which kind of comes down to my point.
Oh, Tammy, I love you.
But my point is that I was always about actually the services, frontline services.
Hang on. How'd you get him out?
Well, do you know, I knew all of the details and all of the authorization passes for the security who would have to come with us. So I just rung up and said it had been authorized, and I did it at 5 o'clock in the morning and sent an email to the head of social care, saying I absolutely recognise why you've said no. I realise you think he's a flight risk. I realise you think he's going to be secreting heroin, etc., etc. However, this lad needs this and this will be the making of breaking of for the rest of his life. Fire me if you need to. And then when we got back, granted, he was 15 by this point. I'd made him, we had a really strong professional relationship and he knew what was on the line. There was no way he was going to break that. No way. And he was a huge flight risk, but I gave him what Jane gave me. I had faith in him. And I came back and they didn't fire me, and it did start a huge investigation into putting the needs of young people before the risk management process.